Hi everybody, welcome along to our press conference today. My name is David McNeil. I'm a member of the PAC event committee and a former board member of this club. While we're all riveted in horror really at what's going on in the Ukraine, it's a tragedy, but of course the world keeps spinning and Japan has its own share of tragedies, and many people would cite the accident of March 2011, the nuclear accident, the tsunami, and the earthquake, of course, is one of those tragedies. We're now 11 years since that disaster, and we have had this constant back and forth over the impact of the radiation which spilled from the Fukushima nuclear power plant, the Daiichi nuclear power plant, after that accident. So what we understand is that nearly 300 cases of thyroid cancer have been detected in mass screenings of people, Fukushima residents, since that disaster in 2011, and they may have been exposed to radiation from the accident. The Japanese government, of course, insists that there is no relationship between the accident and the increase in the number of people, and particularly children suffering from thyroid cancer. And as a result, say our speakers today, many victims have felt unable to speak out about their fears. Our two speakers, we're very honored and privileged to welcome them. Kenichi Ido Sensei, he's an attorney. He's lead counsel for the 311 children's thyroid cancer lawsuit. Hiroyuki Kawai is also an attorney. He's co-counsel for the 311 children's thyroid lawsuit. They represent 6 young Japanese people who have filed a class action lawsuit against TEPCO, Tokyo Electric Power Company, the operator of the Daiichi power plant, in March 2011. They are seeking a total of 616 million yen in compensation. The plaintiffs, the 6 plaintiffs, were aged between 6 and 16 years old at the time of the disaster, and they say that they have developed thyroid cancer due to exposure to radiation after the meltdown. 4 of the 6 people have had their thyroids removed. Our 2 speakers will speak for about 10 minutes. That includes translation. Ito Sensei will go first, and Kawai Sensei will go second, and they will show a couple of slides, I believe. Our interpreter today is Mary Joyce. よろしくお願いします。
3.11子ども甲状腺がん裁判の弁護団長を務めております弁護士の井戸健一です。よろしくお願いいたします。
So good afternoon. My name is Kenichi Ido, and I'm the lead counsel of the 311 Children's Thyroid Cancer lawsuit. Thank you for today.
今回提訴したのは現在17歳から27歳、福島原発事故当時は6歳から16歳であった6人の若者で、全員が小児甲状腺がんの患者です。被告は東京電力ホールディングス株式会社、請求額は1人8800万円から1億1000万円です。自分たちが小児甲状腺がんに罹患したのは福島原発事故が原因であると主張しております。
And so this lawsuit was filed by 6 young people who are currently aged between 17 and 27 years old. They were all between 6 and 16 years old at the time of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. All of these children have pediatric thyroid cancer. The defendant in the suit is Tokyo Electric Power Holdings Company, and the amount being claimed ranges per person from 88 million yen to 110 million yen. And the plaintiffs are claiming that their thyroid cancer was caused by the Fukushima nuclear disaster.
彼らが提訴を決断するのは容易なことではありませんでした。なぜなら、日本政府や福島県は、福島原発事故による住民の健康被害はないと決めつけており、メディアによってその認識が日本の社会に浸透しているからです。被爆によって甲状腺がんになったと主張すれば、それは福島の復興を妨害する風評加害者として周りからバッシングされるのです。彼らやその家族は自分のがんの原因は被爆であると考えていましたが、そのことを口に出すことができなかったのです。
Filing this lawsuit was not an easy decision for them to make. The reason for this is because both the Japanese national and also the Fukushima prefectural governments have made the decision or assumption that there is no health risk to the population as a result of the Fukushima nuclear disaster. And through the media, this perception has also been propagated throughout Japanese society. If these children or they are claiming to have developed thyroid cancer as a result of the exposure to radiation, they are bashed as perpetrators of harmful rumors who are obstructing the recovery of Fukushima. Although the patients and also their families have believed that their cancers were indeed caused by exposure to radiation, they have not been able to speak out and to say so.
しかし、一方でがんは確実に進行しました。6人全員が甲状腺の変容、片方ですね、を切除し、再発した4人は甲状腺全部を摘出しました。甲状腺をなくした4人は、あえて放射性物質を服用するという過酷な RAI 治療を受け、あるいは受けようとしています。さらに生涯、ホルモン剤を飲み続けなければなりません。うち1人はさらに再発を繰り返して、合計4回も手術をしました。うち1人は肺への転移を指摘されています。
However, their disease or the cancer has continued to progress. All 6 of the patients have had to undergo some kind of lobectomy. 2 of those have had only lobectomy, so only half, where 4 have had to undergo a total thyroidectomy.
向いて生きるためには、病気にさせられた原因をはっきりさせ、原因を作った東京電力に賠償を求めるという決断をする必要があったのです。
So as well as these medical impacts, some of these young people have been forced to leave university even after they had been accepted to study them. Others have had to resign from their job or work as a result of their illness as well. Yet even amongst such uncertainty in their lives, these young people, in order to find a way first to accept living with their illness and to find a way to look toward the future, they have decided to try to identify the cause of their illness and seek compensation from TEPCO as the company responsible for causing this.
しかし、彼らが提訴を決断した動機は賠償だけではありません。彼らは福島原発事故後、同じように小児甲状腺がんに罹患した300人近い若者たちに声を上げる勇気を持ってほしい。そして法律によって福島原発事故による被害者全員に対し、広島・長崎の原爆被害者と同じように、生涯にわたって医療や生活を援助する制度を作ってほしい、そういう願いを抱いて、この提訴を決断しました。
However, compensation is not the motivation or not the only motivation which made the children decide to sue and to file this lawsuit. Indeed, they also want the other close to 300 young people who have been impacted or diagnosed with thyroid cancer after the Fukushima disaster to gain the courage to be able to speak out. And further, they also are hoping for there to be legal provisions for lifelong medical care and also livelihood support for all victims or people impacted by the Fukushima disaster, just as the law was put in place for lifelong support for the victims of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
なお、NPO 法人311甲状腺がん子ども基金が100名を超える小児甲状腺がん患者およびその家族にアンケート調査をしたところ、患者や家族のうち6割が病気になった原因が被爆であると考えていることが分かりました。小児甲状腺がんは本来1年間に100万人に1人から2人しか発生しない極めて稀ながんです。それが福島原発事故から11年間で分かっているだけでも293人の子どもに発生したのですから、原因が被爆であると考えるのは自然なことです。私たちはこの提訴によって勇気を持って彼らに続いてくれる若者が出てくることを期待しています。
The nonprofit organization called the 311 Thyroid-Cancer Children's Fund conducted a survey of over 100 pediatric thyroid cancer patients and their families. Through this survey, they found that 60% of the patients and their families believed that their illness was caused by exposure to radiation. Pediatric thyroid cancer is an extremely rare cancer, usually only occurring in 1 or 2 cases per million people on an annual basis. Yet in the 11 years since the Fukushima nuclear disaster, there have been 293 children diagnosed with thyroid cancer. Therefore, it is natural to assume that indeed the cause for this would be the exposure to radiation. We are hoping that this lawsuit will provide or will inspire other young people to be able to also follow in their footsteps.
福島原発事故はレベル7の大事故です。住民の健康被害が生じないはずがありません。政府がすべきことは、住民の被曝量と健康状態を継続的に調査し、得られたデータを公開して幅広く議論し、被曝が原因であることを否定できない健康被害者に対して速やかに補償することです。しかし日本の政府は、被曝量も健康状態もほとんど調査せず、住民に被曝による健康被害はないものと決めつけています。私はこの裁判を国に政策転換を迫っていく力にしたいと考えています。
The Fukushima nuclear disaster was a level 7 accident. There is no reason to assume that after an accident of such a scale, there would be no health risk to the population. What the government should be doing is to continue to investigate both the exposure levels or dose exposed and the health conditions of the residents to make this data available publicly and also for broad public discussion, and to also promptly compensate those whose health impacts cannot be clearly denied as having been related to exposure. The Japanese government, however, has done very little to investigate exposure levels or health conditions and has made the pre-assumption that residents have no health impacts due to exposure. We hope that this lawsuit will become a force which can help to stimulate the government to change its stance or its policy.
原発を稼働させているウクライナにロシアが攻め込んだことから、不安定な国際社会で原発を稼働させていることがいかに大きなリスクを招くかが明らかになりました。原発が重大事故を起こせば、住民、特に子どもたちに深刻な健康被害が生じます。国家がその事実を隠蔽することは許されません。ぜひ世界に向けてこの裁判のことを発信していただけますようお願いいたします。
The Russian invasion of Ukraine, where nuclear power plants are operating, has shown the great risks of operating nuclear power plants within an unstable international community. If a serious accident is to occur at a nuclear power plant, it will cause serious health problems for the population and especially for children. It is unacceptable for the state to conceal this fact, and we ask for your support in conveying to the world about this lawsuit.
最後に日本原子力研究開発機構が作成した東日本における要素131、これが甲状腺がんの原因になるわけですが、この広域拡散と大気効果量のシミュレーション、2011年3月12日から3月26日までを見ていただきます。放射性要素131が福島県およびその周辺に大量に降り注いだことがお分かりいただけると思います。
And so now, to close, we'd like to show you a simulation of the regional dispersion and atmospheric fallout of iodine-131 in East Japan, which is prepared by the Japan Atomic Energy Agency. This is showing the simulation between March 12 to 26 in 2011. And you can see, indeed, the high levels of radioactive iodine which did fall in and around Fukushima Prefecture.
次に、日本原子力研究開発機構安全研究センターが、2011年4月14日に公表した4月5日から6日現在の福島県内小学校の土壌汚染濃度の一覧表を見ていただきます。放射性
Next, we'd like to show, this slide is showing the list of soil contamination concentrations at elementary schools in Fukushima Prefecture as at April 5 and 6 in 2011. And this data was published by the Safety Research Center of the Japan Atomic Energy Agency on April 14 of the same year.
放射性物質が大量放出した3月15日から3週間が経過しており、半減期が8日である要素131は大幅に減少しているはずですが、それでも要素131の土壌汚染濃度は、例えば川俣町の山木屋小学校、あれのピンクで、色塗りをしている小学校です。ここでは1平方メートルあたり195万ベクレルであり、小児甲状腺がんが多発したベラルーシの5ミリと匹敵する数値です。
And so this timing was 3 weeks since the massive release of radioactive materials on March the 15th. So the concentration of iodine-131, which has a half-life of 8 days, should have decreased significantly. However, we can see here that the concentration of I-131 in the soil at the Yamakiya Primary School in Kawamata town, which is shown in the pink row, for example, was 1.96 million becquerels per square meter, which is levels comparable to that in Gomeli in Belarus, where many cases of childhood thyroid cancer occurred.
福島県県民健康調査検討委員会は、小児甲状腺がん多発の原因が被爆であることを否定する理由として、チェルノブイリ原発事故より被爆量が少ないと主張していますが、その主張に理由のないことがお分かりいただけると思います。
The Oversight Committee of the Fukushima Prefectural Health Management Survey uses as the reason to deny that radiation exposure is the cause of a higher incidence of thyroid cancer in children in Fukushima, their claim that the amount of exposure in Fukushima was lower than it had been in Chernobyl. However, looking at the numbers on this slide, you can see that there is no grounds for this claim.
ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Kawai Sensei,
はい、
よろしくお願いします。
私は弁護士の河合博之です。日本各地で原発を差し止める裁判をしております。他方、小泉純一郎さんやと、ペアを組んで、原発ゼロ自然エネルギー推進連盟という組織を作って、日本中の原発をなくすための運動をしております。
Good afternoon. My name is Hiroyuki Kawai. I am an attorney, and I have been involved in this particular suit and also many different lawsuits calling for an injunction against the operations of nuclear power plants throughout all of Japan. As well as this, together with former Prime Minister Koizumi, I launched the Federation of Promotion of Zero Nuclear Power and Renewable Energy, or Genjiden, which is a federation or an organization working to phase out all nuclear power plants from Japan.
皆さんご存知のように EU タクソノミーに原子力発電所を加えるというそういうことが今 EU で進んでいます。でそれに対して日本の5人の元首相がそういうことはやめるべきであると、原発を優遇するのはやめるべきであるという声明を出し、EU の委員長に警告書を発しました。
As you are no doubt aware, there has been or there's discussion within the European Union at the moment to include nuclear power in the EU taxonomy, which would also mean giving priority for preference for investment and so on in nuclear power. However, believing that this is the wrong policy to take, as Genjiden, together with 5 former prime ministers of Japan, we issued a statement which was sent to the president of the European Commission saying that nuclear power should not be included in the EU taxonomy.
そして、そのための記者会見を今年の1月27日にこの外国人特派員クラブで、小泉首相と菅首相がいたしました。
A press conference was held on this very topic here at the FCCJ on January the 27th with former Prime Ministers Koizumi and Kan.
そしてその声明文の中には前置きとして、福島原発事故後多くの子どもたちが甲状腺がんに苦しんでいると書いてありました。
And within this statement that was issued by the 5 former prime ministers, as somewhat of an introduction, there was a sentence which referred to the fact that many children are suffering from thyroid cancer.
ところが、この前置きに過ぎない多くの子どもたちが甲状腺がんに苦しみという部分に、大変な過剰な反応がありました。それは環境省、環境大臣、それから福島県、それから岸田首相、それから自民党福島県連などからの攻撃的反論です。
However, there was an extreme response to this one sentence which had been included as somewhat even of a preface within this statement, referring to many children are suffering. There were very belligerent responses from the Ministry of Environment and indeed the minister himself, from the Fukushima prefectural government, and even from Prime Minister Kishida and the Fukushima Federation of the LDP as well.
私はその幹事として、この強烈な過剰な反応に大変驚きました。この過剰な反応をした人たち、もしくは組織は、いわゆる原子力村に属する原子力推進勢力です。
So as one of the officers of Genjiren, the organization, I was very surprised indeed to see this very strong or powerful attack and extreme response to this one sentence. And indeed, these were coming from either individuals or organizations who are part of the so-called nuclear village promoting nuclear power.
でまた一方、外国人記者特派員クラブでの記者会見というのが大変大きな影響力があるんだということにも驚きました。
And I was also quite surprised at the time to see the significant influence that press conferences at the FCCJ indeed have.
彼らの言い分はこういうことです。要するに、福島県で、小児甲状腺がんは多発していない。仮に発生しているとしても、福島原発事故とは因果関係がないというものです。
And the argument of these people who are in opposition is that there is no high incidence of thyroid cancer in Fukushima Prefecture, and even if there were, there is no causal link to the Fukushima nuclear disaster.
彼らがなぜそのようにヒステリックに行動しているか、攻撃してきたかという、その原因は明らかです。原子力推進勢力にとって一番大事な論理は、原発事故で放射能をばらまいても健康被害はないから、原発が事故を起こしても安全だと、大丈夫だと、健康被害はないと。だから原発は再稼働してもいいんだという論理を貫徹するためであることは明らかです。
So when considering why indeed they conduct such, well, almost hysteric attacks in regards to that, there is a very clear reason for this. And the reason is that for these pro-nuclear forces, indeed, they see that their position that if there is, even if a nuclear disaster or nuclear accident at a power plant happens and there is fallout, there will be no health impacts. Therefore, it is safe, even if an accident occurs and if there will be no health risks or health impacts, then it is safe to also restart the nuclear reactors. They are seeing this as the logic that they need to put forward in order to go ahead with their plans for restarting.
原発事故が起きると放射能がばらまかれて、その放射能によって甲状腺がんなどのや白血病の健康被害が発生するということになると、原発は怖い、だから原発はやめよう、原発を廃止しようということになるのは明らかです。
It is clear that, of course, if people see that nuclear power plant accidents, if they occur and there is radioactive fallout, then this can lead to an occurrence of health impacts such as thyroid cancer or leukemia. If people see this as something that is scary, they will, of course, naturally think that, well, we should stop nuclear power plants and we should get rid of nuclear power.
だから彼らすなわち原子力推進勢力、私たちが言う原子力村は絶対に小児甲状腺がんと福島県に多発している小児甲状腺がんと福島原発事故の因果関係を認めたくないのです。
And therefore, these pro-nuclear forces, or who we would call the nuclear village, they do not want to acknowledge any causal relationship between the high incidence of thyroid cancer in Fukushima and the nuclear disaster.
でも、小児甲状腺がんというのは、1年間で100万人に1人、もしくは2人しか発生しない奇病です。
However, as has been mentioned, childhood thyroid cancer is a very rare disease which usually only occurs in 1 or 2 people per million people every year.
それが福島原発事故の10年で38万人に対して266人の小児甲状腺がんが発生しているのです。それは倍率でいうと35倍から70倍です。
However, in the 11 years since the Fukushima nuclear disaster, of 380,000 people who have been tested, there have been 266 cases of children thyroid cancer being diagnosed. So this is a rate higher by between 35 to 70 times.
したがって因果関係がないはずがありません。
Therefore, it is impossible to deny any causal relationship.
そのうち222人は甲状腺がんの手術を受けています。したがってそれを過剰診断ということはできません。
And further, of these people who have been diagnosed, 222 have already had to undergo operations. Therefore, this also means that it is not possible to say that this is just an issue of overdiagnosis.
私たちは環境省および福島県などに的確な反論をし、それに対する回答を求めてきましたが、彼らは一切答えてきません。
We submitted or made a public rebuttal to the opposition or the claims which were made by the Ministry of the Environment and Fukushima Prefecture. However, there has been no response to the questions which we posed to them.
彼らは266人とか220人とかいう数字に一切言及しません。その数字を言うと、彼らの言い分が嘘だということがすぐにバレてしまうからです。こうした裁判は、この論争に決着をつけるために非常に重要な裁判です。
This lawsuit is an extremely important lawsuit in order to bring a conclusion to this debate.
私たちはこの裁判に全力を尽くして戦います。そして、この運動と弁護団のテーマカラーとして緑を決めました。でまた私は緑の蝶ネクタイをつけていますが、これは甲状腺が蝶の形をしていることから、そのシンボルとしてつけているものです。
So we, as the counsel for this lawsuit, will be putting all our efforts into this struggle as well. And both the legal team and also the movement which is supporting the lawsuit has selected green as the symbol color for this effort. And you can see today I am wearing a green-colored bow tie. The bow tie has been selected also because it is in the shape of the thyroid, therefore wearing this as a message as well.
私たちは必ず勝ちます。なぜならば、勝つまで戦いをやめないからです。よろしくお願いします。
We will certainly be successful. The reason for this is we will continue to make all efforts we can until we do so.
Thank you very much. And I was wondering about the green necktie. I've been known to wear a green necktie, but that's because I'm Irish, and we wear them on St. Patrick's Day. Well, as somebody who has who spent quite a lot of time up there actually in Fukushima in March and April 2011. I feel a personal stake in this conversation. I'll just ask the first question if that's okay. Obviously, the things that you'll have to deal with, as I understand them scientifically, are that you have tested 300,000 people in Fukushima, and that given the size of the screening, that 266 cases is not that much. I'm sure this is what the government will say to you. The other issue, I'm just reading from a scientific paper here, is that at present it is difficult or impossible to distinguish radiation-induced thyroid cancer from spontaneous sporadic thyroid cancer. So I would have thought those were at the core of your lawsuit, the size of the screening, whether this is anomalous, whether the numbers that you have are anomalous, and the difficulty of proving the link between radiation and cancer. I wonder if you could address those. Sorry, Marie, that's quite a mouthful.
お二人ありがとうございます。私自身も2011年3月4月に福島にかなり長く滞在していたので、個人的にも非常に関心を持っているテーマでございます。まず一つ司会の方から質問させていただきたいんですけれども、そのスクリーニングの、その人数の話なんですけれども、これはおそらく裁判の中で政府側から主張されることだと思うんですけれども、38人の中で266人というのは、それほど大きな人数ではないんじゃないかというような反論は予想されるということもあるかと思います。政府側もそのような主張するかと思うんですけれども、その38万という非常に大きなそのスクリーニングの人数とその関係について一つコメントいただければと思います。そして2つ目の方なんですけれども、これは科学的な論文からの話なんですけれども、やはり婚姻関係、その原因がもう本当に放射能であるということを特定する、決定的に示すということは非常に難しいということが、科学的にも言われていることではありますが、その関係などについてのどのように証明をしていくのか、その因果関係などについてのコメントも2つ目としてお願いできればいたします。
まず小児甲状腺がんが、年間100万人に1人か2人というのは日本における客観的なデータとしてあります。したがって福島県の子どもの数が37、8万人だとすれば、せいぜい2年に1人出るか否かという数字です。それが11年間に県民健康調査で266、それ以外で発見された27、合わせて293出てるわけですから、それが普通ではない数字であることはお分かりいただけると思います。
So in regards to the first question, there is the objective data existing in Japan that the usual incidence of childhood thyroid cancer is between 1 and 2 per 1 million people per year as well. So if we take the number of children in Fukushima Prefecture as between, 370, 380,000, this would be, in normal circumstances, we could imagine that there would be maybe one case every 2 years or so. That would be the usual figures that could be assumed from the overall Japanese incidence. However, when we consider that within the Fukushima Prefectural Health Management Survey in 11 years, there has been 266 cases diagnosed, and including those which were found outside of these cases as well, there's actually a total of 293 cases, then we can see that this is indeed a much higher number than would be expected normally within such a population.
訴訟における証明に関する考え方ですが、今申し上げたように福島原発事故後、福島県では小児甲状腺がんが異常に多数発生している。これがまず第一です。で、第二は、甲状腺がんの原因として、科学的に明確に証明されているのは被爆であるということです。それから3番目は、この原告6名を含む福島県の子どもたちは大なり小なり相当の被爆をしたということです。で、この3つの要因がある以上は、原因が被爆であると考えるのが自然であって、もし被告の東京電力がそれを否定するのであれば、それ以外の原因を東京電力が証明すべきである。それができないのであれば、原因は被爆であるというふうに裁判所は判断すべきである。そういうふうに私たちは考えています。
And as to the second question, looking at the issue of causality and how to prove causality in connection to the radiation exposure, the way that we are thinking this within the lawsuit is, first of all, looking at the fact that there is a high incidence of childhood thyroid cancer in Fukushima following the nuclear disaster. Also, that it is proven that radiation exposure is a clear risk factor for thyroid cancer. This is also given facts which are accepted. Then when we consider that all of the plaintiffs and indeed all children in Fukushima were exposed to substantial doses of radiation following the nuclear disaster, then it is natural to assume that indeed it is highly probable that there is a causal relationship between the exposure to radiation and the plaintiff's thyroid cancer. If it is indeed, if the defendant TEPCO is to be claiming that the cause of the thyroid cancer was not the exposure to radiation, then actually we call on the defendant to prove indeed that there were other causes other than radiation which were relevant or leading to this as well. And if the defendant is not able to prove that the cancer of the plaintiffs was caused by a factor other than exposure to radiation, then we call upon the court to recognize that the cancer of the plaintiffs was caused by this exposure to radiation as a result of the disaster.
Thank you very much. Well, I have a number of questions lined up here online. I'll throw it open to the room. Does anybody in the room have a question? I see Ilgin's hand up. If you could come to the microphone, please. If you do ask a question, can you remind us who you are and who you work for? Thank you.
Thank you. Ilgin Yorulmaz for BBC World Turkish. I'm also the second vice president of FCCJ. It's amazing that one of the thyroid conditions in the world called hypothyroidism is named after a doctor, a Japanese doctor, Hashimoto. So it's called Hashimoto disease. But then we are here discussing, declining this sort of a correlation. Every year, I know that children in Japan are actually screened, go through a health screen by the government. But the thyroid screening is very special. So why do you think the government even attempted to screen these children if they were not suspecting in Fukushima area, that there is a risk of the radiation to children? And also, I just want to ask, what is the government really afraid of? I know Sensei mentioned nuclear village, but is the government afraid of an avalanche of lawsuits, maybe not just from children, but also from adults for their health issues? Thank you.
BBC ワールドトルコ語版のヨルマズと申します。そしてこちらの FCCJ の副会長もしております。非常に、日本の医師の名前から取ったその橋本病という、甲状腺の病気があるというのを、ある意味で今の状況を考えると少し、皮肉的なこともあるかと思いますが、質問2つほどしたいと思います。まず1つ目は日本の子どもたちが毎年日本政府によって、その健康検査などを受けていると思うんですけれども、福島県の子どもたちにその甲状腺の検査を特別にするというふうに政府が決定したというのは、その影響がないというふうに政府がもし決めている、考えているのであれば、そもそもその甲状腺の検査をなぜ政府はしようというふうに決めたのかということがまず1つ目です。そのリスクがない、被害がないというふうに政府が思っているのであれば、なぜわざわざ甲状腺の検査を行うことにしたのかということが1つ目です。そして2つ目の先ほどの河合先生の話とも関連することなんですけれども、日本政府は本当に何を恐れているのでしょうか。先ほど原子力村の原発村の話があったんですけれども、例えば今回のようなことでその関係が証明されたのであれば、子どものみならず大人からも多くの裁判ですとか賠償を求めるような動きが日本で起こることを政府は恐れていますでしょうか。それが2つ目の質問です。
1つ目の質問に対して私の考えを述べます。政府あるいは福島県も福島原発事故によって小児甲状腺がんが増えるのではないかという危惧は当然抱いていたはずで、それをはっきりさせるためにこの福島県民健康調査が始まったんだというふうに思います。 ただ、彼らはそれを認めませんので、本音はそうであっても、建前では認めませんので、建前では福島県の人たちに安心してもらうために検査をするんだと。それが建前です。だから検査をすることによってですね、被爆による健康被害がないということを証明するために、この県民健康調査を始めたんだと。これが建前です。そこには建前と本音のズレがあるんだというふうに思っております。
So to respond to the first question, I would like to share my own personal view. I think that there is a difference between the reasons for conducting these thyroid screenings. It could be called in Japanese the difference between the tatemae and honne, or the difference between the public reason and what is really being held inside. I believe that both the Japanese national government and also the Fukushima government indeed were fearful or did consider that there would be these risks of an increase in childhood thyroid cancer as well. And in order to have clarification or to make this clear, they decided to conduct the Fukushima Prefectural Health Management Survey. However, this is of course not the reason which is being given on the public face for that. The public reason which is being given for conducting these thyroid screenings is to be able to put the people of Fukushima at ease, to be able to reassure them. So conducting these tests to be able to demonstrate that there are no health impacts, and then to be able to reassure the people as well. So this is the public reason which is being given for these testings.
第一の質問に対して私の意見を申し上げます。政府も県もああいう重大事故が起きたのですから、健康についての調査をせざるを得なかったと思います。もし全くしなかったら大変な世論の非難を浴びていたと思います。したがって、そうせざるを得ない、当然のこととしてそれを始めた。ところが調査をしてみるとどんどん悪い結果が出てきた。それは大変だと。このままだと大変なことになるということで、急ブレーキをかけてスローダウンをした。そしてなるべく調べないようにしようという試みを2年後ぐらいから一生懸命始めて、今もその県民健康調査による甲状腺がんの調査をなるべくしないように、みんなが子どもたちが受けないように仕向けようとしています。例えば高校の授業中に高校生の調査をするのは人権侵害だからやめさせようとかですね、そういう馬鹿げた試みをしています。彼らは今となってはこういう調査を始めたことを本当は後悔していると思いますが、今更やめるわけにもいかないので、なるべく早く手仕舞いしたいというふうに思っているのではないかと思っています。
To share my opinion about the first question, of course, given that such a severe accident did happen, both the national and the prefectural government, of course, felt that there was a need to carry out these health investigations, health survey, and if nothing had been done at all, there would have been an enormous criticism from the public, a backlash in regards to that if no screenings, if no kind of health survey had been done. However, I believe that when they started to conduct this survey and started to see these bad results coming out as well, they decided, well, being fearful of what would happen then, to suddenly put the brakes on this, to slow down the survey, to not investigate as much as possible, for example. And that was the situation which could be seen from around 2 years after the survey began and is still continuing today as well. We can see the situation where they are trying to carry out the tests within the Fukushima Prefectural Health Management Survey as little as possible or as slowly as possible, also discouraging people from taking the tests as part of the survey as well. For example, by conducting the thyroid tests for high school students during class time. And then so people say, well, this is a human rights violation. You shouldn't be pulling children out of their education in order to be having these tests. And so trying to put a stop on the testing in these other completely ridiculous ways as well. So I think that the government is probably now regretting the fact that they did indeed launch these testing or the survey in that way, but they cannot, of course, just immediately put a stop to that. So they are trying to slow down or close it through these other means instead.
第2の質問について答えると、原子力村、日本の政府を含む、今の政府を含む原子力村が 一番恐れている、何を恐れているかということですけど、甲状腺がんが多発している。それが福島原発事故、すなわち原発事故によってばらまかれた放射性物質によるものだと分かることは、原発に対する恐怖感を、国民的恐怖感を非常に強くします。でそれは当然、原発をやめようという世論につながります。それが一番彼らが恐れていることだと思います。
And as to the second question, what I believe the Japanese government is most fearful of, and this is the nuclear village, which I would say includes the current Japanese government, is that if the public were to see that there is a link between the high incidence of thyroid cancer and the fallout of the Fukushima nuclear disaster, this would naturally lead to a very strong fear in the public in regards to nuclear power, which would connect also to a stronger public opinion wanting to stop nuclear power being used here in Japan.
ただ一つお断りしておきたいんですが、私たちが今回起こした訴訟は、あくまでも今の原告6人の救済と、それからまだ訴訟を起こしていない人たちのための救済措置を講じることで、原発を直接ですね、原発を差し止めるために起こしたわけではありません。それは別の部隊が、別の人たちがやっていることで、この訴訟はあくまでもまず目の前の6人を救いたい、そしてその背後にいる数百人の人たちを救いたいという思いで起こしている訴訟であることは、ぜひ確認していただきたいと思います。
However, I would also like to add or to confirm that the 311 children's thyroid cancer lawsuit is a lawsuit for the purposes of seeking the relief and support for the 6 plaintiffs, and also for those other children who have not been able to yet come out or to appeal in such a way as well. This particular lawsuit is not directly looking at any kind of stopping or injunction against nuclear power plants itself. There is a separate stage and separate people who are involved in that purpose, in that means. This particular lawsuit is directly focused on helping immediately these 6 plaintiffs and also the hundreds of others like them who are standing behind them as well.
Thank you. Sorry, if you don't mind, I'll just barge in because we're running out of time. I'll read the online question because it directly pertains, or the first online question, it pertains to that. So we know of 260, this question, by the way, is from Jonan Fleury. He's with Quest France newspaper. He says, we know of 266 cases of thyroid cancer being exposed in the region. Do you think this number is accurate or underestimated, is his question.
次関連の質問なのでまとめて聞きしますが、こちらオンラインでクエストフランスの記者から届いている質問です。すでに明らかになっている診断として266名がいるということなんですけれども、この数字は全体として正確なのか、本当はもっといるのかというふうに、この266人という数字についてどのふうに先生は見ているのでしょうか。
福島県民健康調査で、確認された数字としてはおそらく正確なんだろうと思います。ただそれ以外、その外側で福島健康調査以外で発見された子どもたちっていうのがいて、それがどれぐらいいるのかというのは正確には分からないんですけれども、最近27という数字が出てきて、合わせると293になります。でそれ以外にもある可能性はあるとは思いますけれども、それについては今のところは分かりません。
So as to this number of 266, this is the number who have been diagnosed as part of the Fukushima Health Management Survey, and this, I believe, is an accurate number from within that target population. However, there are, of course, some people who are not part of this health management survey who have been diagnosed with thyroid cancer as well, including some from outside of this target area. The accurate number or the exact number is not known. However, the figure that we have recently heard or understand is 27 additional cases on top of this 266. Therefore, we are seeing at the moment that the total number that we have been confirmed as 293 cases of childhood thyroid cancer. There may, of course, be many others who are not included within this. This is a possibility. However, that is unknown at this stage.
Thank you. Just scanning the room to see if anybody has another question. Karen, I see your hand up. Don't forget to tell us who you are. Thanks.
今日はありがとうございます。ラジオフランスの西村と申します。一点お願いします。今回の266人の中で総称した人数は6人だけです。なぜその260人は総称しなかった主な理由は何ですか？
My name is Nishimura of Radio France. I would like to ask that in this lawsuit at hand, it is only 6 plaintiffs. However, there are 266 children who have been diagnosed overall within Fukushima Prefecture. I would like to ask what you think the main reason that the other 260 are not involved in the lawsuit or have not been suing.
293人のがんになった子どもたちですが、皆さん口をつぐんでいるので、お互いの連絡も何もありません。それぞれが孤立して、苦しんできています。でたまたま今回6人が提訴することができたのは、原発関係の訴訟で有名な河合弁護士のところに、相談をしたり、連絡を取ってですね、それで、その6人が相互に、連絡が取れるようになってやろうという話になったわけですけれども、同じように苦しんでいるたくさんの人はいると思いますが、それぞれが、連絡なしに生活してますので、今回こういう形になってます。だから後の人たちが提訴しないというふうに別に判断しているわけではないので、今回のことを聞いてですね、それなら自分もやってみようかと、自分もやりたいというふうに思う若者たちがきっと出てくるだろうというふうに思って、それを期待して待っています。
So of the 293 children who have been diagnosed with thyroid cancer, they have been mostly had to be keeping quiet about the situation that they are suffering in as well. There is no system for any horizontal communication contact between these children, and they have been isolated in their suffering throughout these years without being aware of knowing of the others as well. The reason that in this particular lawsuit they were this group of 6 plaintiffs who were able to come together is they all reached out to Mr. Kawai, who is a very well-known attorney in lawsuits to do with nuclear-related issues as well. So they had reached out to his office wanting to consult or to be in touch about this. And through this, they were able to then be connected, be in touch with each other, and they made the decision to file the lawsuit together. So there are, of course, many others who are suffering in their own ways, but they're not necessarily in contact or in communication as well. However, we would also not judge that it will be only these 6 in the future who will file such lawsuits as well. We believe that it may be possible indeed that they will see what is happening with this lawsuit at hand and realize that they could also do this kind of thing, or this kind of option is there as well for them. And so we indeed do hope that also there will be more children coming out in this kind of way in the future as well.
Thank you very much.
ちょっと待ってください。
どうぞ。
河合の方から。この問題は大変深刻な問題です。普通のケースならね、被害者の人たちが集まって集団訴訟を起こすだろうっていうケースです。で、現に同じ福島原発事故の被害者でも財産的被害の人たちは集団訴訟を起こしています。大変なスケールになっています。日本全国で今でも30何件訴訟が起きていて、何万人もの人が訴えています。でもこの健康被害、甲状腺被害、がん被害のことについては全く起きていませんでした。それはなぜかというと、それが分かると、お前黙ってろ、それは言うなと、福島県にとって、我々にとって良くないんだ、風評被害が広がるんだということで、社会的な圧力が非常に強いんです。で、実際に 発症している人たちはどういう状況に置かれているかというと、自分が甲状腺がんになったことは絶対に秘密にして、で母親と本人しか知らない、お父さんも知らないというケースもあります。ひた隠しに隠しているケースもあります。でもさすがにお父さんにも言わないというのは非常に難しいですけど、例えば親と子供しか知らない、兄弟も知らないというケースがほとんどだというふうに思われます。そしてこういう被害が集団的発生、被害が発生したときには当然被害者の名簿リストができるはずです。で私たちはそれを入手しようとしました。しかしそんなものは個人情報ということで絶対に開示されませんでした。それから患者同士も横のつながりがないので、例えば患者団体ということで名簿を作ることも全くしていません。ですから彼らは完全に分断され抑え込まれている状況に今でもあります。それは大変残念なことです。
To add on to that, this is an extremely serious issue. In the usual cases, of course, victims of any particular incident and so on would come together to take a class action as a legal step as well. And in the case of looking at the impact of the Fukushima disaster for financial damages which have been occurred as a result of the disaster, there are many different cases happening actually even today in Japan on a very large scale. There are more than 30 such lawsuits currently underway. And there are tens of thousands of people who are involved in these class actions as well. However, when it comes to the health damages, this is not the case at all. Until this particular case, there had been no legal actions in regards to this. And what is the reason for this? This is because there is an enormous pressure on the patients to be silent about this issue. If they are speaking about the health impacts as well, there is an enormous social pressure saying that that is something it's inconvenient for Fukushima, it's putting out harmful rumors that will impact the recovery and so on as well. So what kind of situation are indeed these patients, these children with thyroid cancer in? In many cases, actually, it is only the patient themselves and their mother who are even aware of the diagnosis. In many families, even the father is not aware of the fact that their child has been diagnosed in this way. Siblings also, in almost no cases, are informed of the fact that their sibling has also been diagnosed with thyroid cancer as well. There is an enormous pressure, even within families and within the broader society, not to tell anybody if you have been diagnosed with thyroid cancer, and this is having an enormous impact on this as well. Of course, in the case of a class action, you would have usually, a list of the victims or the people who had been impacted by the disaster. We did seek out to see if this kind of thing was available, but of course the list of patients is not made public because of privacy reasons as well. Further, in this case, when it comes to the health impacts from Fukushima, there are no, as was mentioned, horizontal connections or communication between the patients themselves. There is also no, victims association or support group and so on, which has been established, as you would see in other situations where class actions are launched and so on as well. The patients and the children within the society have been completely divided and also silenced in this way, and this is an extremely important issue.
Thank you very much. Well, we're out of time. Would the two senseis, would they mind just staying for an extra question or two? Is that all right?
お時間の方はちょうど2時になったんですけども、数分ぐらい延長してもよろしいでしょうか。まだ一つ二つぐらい質問が届いてます。
This question is an online question. It's from Pio D'Emilia, who is the co-chair of the events committee at this club and a reporter with the Italian TV company Sky TG. He has heard that some fishermen are considering filing a suit in order to prevent TEPCO discharging contaminated water into the ocean. Are you two gentlemen, are you representing them, I guess, but do you know about this suit? And do you find, from a legal point of view, do you find that option convincing? Thank you.
次、オンラインでイタリアのスカイテレビのピオ・デ・ミリアから来ている質問なんですけれども、汚染水問題をめぐって福島の漁師たちが東電に対する訴訟を検討しているという話を伺ったんですけれども、そのような訴訟に先生のお二人はまず関わっていらっしゃるのか、その訴訟の準備などについて何か情報があるのか、またはそのような汚染水を止めるために法的な裁判という手段は効果的なのかということについてのコメントをお願いします。
そういう訴訟が漁協によって準備されているという話は、私は聞いたことがありません。この汚染水の問題というのは、私は全福島県民にとって非常に深刻な問題であり、また世界に与える影響も大きいので、まあそうですね、訴訟というよりも運動によって、広範な反対運動によって阻止すべきテーマかなというふうに思っています。私の聞くところでは、訴訟を起こそう、訴訟という手段で止めようという話は聞いておりません。
I have not heard discussions or preparations in regards to a lawsuit in order to stop the release of contaminated water. I think that this issue is, of course, an issue which is a very serious issue for all people of Fukushima Prefecture, and it is indeed something which would have large global impacts as well. But I think perhaps this is an issue that, rather than using the lawsuit as a method, looking at sort of a broad or wide public opposition or movement to stop that would perhaps be the effective way in order to deal with that issue. To repeat, as far as I am aware, I have not heard of any preparations or efforts to use the means of a lawsuit to stop this release of contaminated water.
今イタリアの方ですか？
そうですね、はい。
はい。それでただ私、非常に驚いたのは、イタリアの方がこの問題に関心を持っているということに驚きました。それほど世界がこの汚染水を海に流すのか流さないのかということを注視しているということがよく分かって、日本国民としては深刻に考えなければいけない問題だと改めて自覚いたしました。
However, I was also somewhat surprised to hear a question coming from an Italian reporter on this issue of contaminated water. I think it really demonstrates that there is global concern as to whether Japan will indeed release this contaminated water into the ocean or not. And the world is paying attention, and this is something which we as Japanese people need to seriously consider also.
Thank you. I'm just scanning the room in case there's any hands up. I don't see any hands up. I'll just ask the last question, which has come in online. This is from Walter Sim, who's with the Straits Times, a Singapore newspaper. I think the first question has been answered, so I'll skip it. The question 2 is, Japan has embarked on a global public relations drive to show how Fukushima has been revitalized and reconstructed since the accident. What do you and your clients feel about this campaign?
次はシンガポールのストレイツタイムズのウォルター・シム記者からの質問です。日本という国、日本政府がグローバル的にも国際的にもその PR キャンペーンを行っていると思うんですけれども、事故後の福島県は今も復興されて安全だというようなキャンペーンを世界的に展開していると思うんですけれども、このような日本によるPR キャンペーンというような先生のお二人、または原告の皆さんはどのように感じていらっしゃるでしょうか。
どうぞ。
福島を経済的に復興させたいという思いは理解しますし、そのために努力はされてるんでしょうけれども、だからといって事実を隠蔽するということは許されない。やはり事実は事実として伝えて、その上で、福島さんのものを買っていただけるかどうか、あるいは福島に来ていただけるかどうか、それはそれぞれの方々の判断、選択の問題である。その事実を隠蔽したり嘘を言ったりすることは、それは許されないことだというふうに思っています。
So I, of course, understand the efforts which are underway for the revitalization, reconstruction of Fukushima. However, this does not mean that facts should be concealed, although we can accept any facts being concealed as well. I believe that indeed these efforts should be made based upon the conveying of the true facts, and then on top of that, for each to be able to make the judgment or the choice about, buying produce from Fukushima, visiting Fukushima, and so on as well. This should be done based on accurate facts and information being conveyed as well. The situation of concealing facts or even lying about facts is something which cannot be accepted.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you to both gentlemen, Keiichi Ido, attorney, lead counsel for the 311 children's thyroid cancer lawsuit, and Hiroyuki Kawai, attorney, co-counsel for the 311 children's thyroid cancer lawsuit. It's a very important issue, and whatever the verdict, I think it will reverberate around the world, the consequences and the interest in it. So thank you very much for coming today and explaining to us. And thank you to Mary for her Rolls-Royce translation as always. And thank you to everybody who came.